The world already knows my name. Today, I want you to know my mother's, Mrs. Georgina, the seamstress from the back street. The phrase echoed through the elegant hall, before cameras, flashes, and applause. But at that same moment, on a simple street, an old television hissed in the living room of a peeling blue house, and the owner of that name almost dropped the remote control. Long before that night of parade, of light and recognition, Donna Georgina's life always fit into a narrow porch, a worn chair, and an old sewing machine that made noise the whole street could hear. In the eyes of the neighborhood, she was nothing more than the rag seamstress sitting near the gate, her glasses slipping down her nose, her knees aching, and her hands marked with thread and needle. She spent hours sewing simple dresses, flared skirts, trouser hems, and flowery aprons. The sound of the sewing machine was almost like a street clock, tur 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 tur. But instead of respect, she received mockery in return. "Here comes the queen of patchwork," murmured a neighbor, laughing. "If it were up to this woman, fashion would die," commented another, without even looking at her. The children joked, imitating the sound of the machine when she went out to buy thread, needles, or zippers. The adults turned their faces away, as if her work was too small to deserve a glance. Georgina pretended not to hear. She swallowed hard, adjusted her posture, and went back to the machine. Sewing was what she knew how to do. It was what paid for the rice, the electricity, the medicine. It was what kept her going when life took almost everything from her except her hands and her will. What nobody knew was that, inside the old wardrobe in her room, there was a wooden box, kept with more care than any colorful scrap of fabric. Inside it, envelopes organized by year, letters, photos, magazine clippings, all from a single person, the daughter she raised alone, the girl who grew up watching her mother transform fabric into dreams, the daughter who left one day, carrying a small suitcase and a huge promise. "One day, Mom, the whole world will know who you are." The neighbor had mocked the seamstress, but I was about to discover that she unknowingly drew inspiration from a famous designer. Donna Georgina was born in a small house with a dirt floor in the countryside, where learning to survive came before learning to dream. She was the third of 7 siblings, and from a young age she knew that the world would never give anything for free. At 10 years old, while other girls played with dolls, she sewed her own dolls with scraps donated by her neighbor. There, in that simple gesture, destiny was already showing signs of what was to come. Her mother, a strong and hard-working woman, taught her everything she knew: how to hold a needle, how to mend pants, how to transform old fabric into new fabric. "Those who know how to sew never go hungry," she used to say. Georgina believed in it so much that, years later, those words were the only emotional shelter she had left. Her adolescence was short. Soon she started working to help at home, first washing clothes for others, then sewing hems and doing repairs for her neighbors. She didn't earn much, but she gained respect, something she didn't yet know she would lose in the future. She married too young, perhaps out of a desire to escape her cramped home, perhaps out of necessity, perhaps believing that love was enough. Her husband at first was kind. He brought joy. He brought promises. But promises don't put food on the table. Over time came his weariness, then alcohol, and finally abandonment. He left without looking back, leaving Georgina with a crib, some overdue bills, and a newborn baby in her arms. Her daughter became the greatest reason for her life. And sewing became her livelihood, her shield, her language. Georgina sewed while the girl slept. She sewed while the girl cried. He sewed while her heart broke piece by piece, trying to be both mother and father at the same time. Meanwhile, the neighbors talked. They always talk. "That girl's daughter will grow up with no future. Seamstresses never get anywhere. A daughter of an abandoned mother won't go far." But the girl grew up seeing something no one else saw: a strong woman, with calloused hands, capable of transforming rags into beauty. The daughter promised that one day she would be someone. He promised that when he succeeded, he would show the world where he came from, who he came from. He promised that his mother would be recognized. And that promise, kept inside the aged letters in the wardrobe, was what kept Georgina strong when the whole world seemed to laugh at her. The neighborhood said she was small, but the daughter knew her mother was a giant. Donna Georgina woke up every day before sunrise. The neighborhood was still silent, the windows closed, the street damp with the morning dew. It was always the same. While the world slept, she would put the kettle on the stove, pin her hair back with a crooked hair clip, and run her hand over the sewing machine like greeting an old friend. The routine began with small adjustments, separating the scraps, rolling up the ribbons, organizing needles and spools. Each piece had its story. Some fabrics she received as gifts, others she bought with carefully counted coins. And even so, she managed to transform everything into something usable, into something beautiful, into something alive. When the neighborhood began to wake up, the sound of the machine already echoed, tur 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 tur, and as always it came accompanied by disapproving glances. The neighbors hurried past on the sidewalk, and instead of a good morning, came a joke disguised as a smile. "Working early, Mrs. Georgina?" one of them would say. "It's a shame that old sewing machine only makes clothes that nobody wants," the other woman added, adjusting her high bun as if she were a soap opera star. "You should be ashamed to charge for those sewing jobs." Georgina simply lowered her eyes and continued, not out of submission, but out of wisdom. She knew that arguing with bitter people was a waste of time, and time for her was what stitched together survival. The hardest part of the day wasn't the work, but the treatment from her own clients. Many asked for credit. "I'll settle up later, Georgina. You understand how difficult it is for me." These same women who mocked the old machine had the audacity to ask for discounts, extensions, favors, and however painful it was, Georgina rarely said no because, deep down, I knew that many of them were ungrateful, but they had children to clothe, uniforms to deliver, hems to adjust. And she didn't want children to suffer because of their mother's pride. The children, they were cruel without realizing it. When she walked down the street with bags of fabric, they imitated the sound of the sewing machine. Tur tur tur. "There goes Auntie the rag seamstress." Georgina kept a firm face, but inside, each taunt was another stitch of pain kept in a corner of her soul. Her daughter, now an adult and famous beyond what any neighbor could imagine, sent messages when she could, always loving, always full of longing. But the rush of her career physically separated the two. And for the neighborhood, this became a reason for gossip. The daughter abandoned her mother. "Well, with that ugly house, who would want to come back? The poor thing lives only by sewing." The words entered Georgina like blunt needles, hurting more than any tied thread. But she didn't retaliate. She never retaliated. One afternoon, while adjusting a neighbor's simple dress address she herself had sewn, something happened that marked Georgina in a silent and cruel way. The neighbor looked at the dress in the square's mirror, struck an exaggerated pose, and announced loudly, "Look, everyone, I'm wearing a creation by our backyard designer." Other women laughed, and more comments arose. "Poor people's clothes. It must have cost 10 reais. That old woman still believes she knows how to sew." Georgina felt her face heat up. She didn't know if it was shame, sadness, or a mixture of both. She gripped the machine tightly, as if it were about to collapse. She ran her wrinkled hands over the wooden table and silently asked for strength. That night, the whole street was already dark when Georgina closed the windows. She sat on the bed, opened the box of letters, and read one of the oldest. "Mom, when I succeed, my success will be yours too." She smiled weakly, a painful smile, a smile of someone who still believes, even without apparent reason. She closed the box, took a deep breath, and returned to the machine, because, despite the painful laughter, sewing was the only thing that still made sense. And the neighborhood at that moment had no idea that this humiliated woman was the heart of the talent of a future international star. The humiliation that Donna Georgina experienced that day didn't begin suddenly. It came slowly, like a fine rain that no one notices, until the flood takes everything at once. It was late afternoon, and the sun shone sideways, illuminating the street square. The same square where the neighbors liked to gather to gossip about other people's lives and measure people's worth by the size of their heels, their bags, or their haircuts. Georgina had just delivered a simple dress, navy blue, with delicate handmade details, to one of the most arrogant neighbors on the street. The woman, all dolled up, posed for herself in the square's mirror as if she were a digital influencer. She did an exaggerated spin and suddenly started laughing loudly. "Look at this, everyone," she said, drawing everyone's attention. Friends approached, curious. The woman pointed to the hem of the dress, raising it arrogantly. "This was made by a backyard fashion designer." The others burst into laughter. Sharp laughter. Laughter that cut like blunt scissors. "Poor people's clothes," said one. "Something someone who's never left the street would wear," added another. "If it depended on this old woman, fashion would die out." Georgina was nearby, finishing an adjustment on another garment. She froze. She felt her hands tremble, her knees lose strength. The neighbor who was wearing the dress gave another mocking spin and said, "People, imagine this lady creating runway clothes. Poor thing, she can barely hem a dress." The women laughed. The children laughed. Even some men who were playing dominoes looked and laughed. They weren't happy laughs. They were laughs that said, "You're worthless." Georgina lowered her eyes. Her vision blurred for a few seconds. She took a deep breath, searching for air where there was none. The neighbor continued, "I only had this dress made because she charges so little. If it were expensive, I would never wear it." Another woman clapped as if applauding a clown. "It must have cost 10 reais." Georgina tried to walk away, but the comments followed her like grim gloom. Her daughter must die of shame. If I had a mother like that, I'd say she was an ant. Imagine growing up seeing that poverty. She heard these last sentences clearly. They entered like stitches too tight, tearing from the inside. Georgina felt her face burn. Her hands began to sweat. The world around her became small. She walked slowly to her sewing machine, which was on the makeshift table on the porch. She ran her hand over the metal casing, as if apologizing, as if saying without saying, "Sorry if I'm not good enough." The old machine seemed to look back, as if it understood. The laughter continued in the square. The simple navy blue dress, which she had sewn with so much care, was now the object of public mockery. Georgina took a deep breath, trying to swallow the pain, when she heard the phrase that hit her like a blow to the chest. "Her daughter must be ashamed of the mother she has." That phrase shattered something inside her. Georgina felt something warm trickle down her eyes, but she quickly wiped it away. She had always been discreet, always been strong, always suffered in silence. The humiliation wasn't in her clothes. It was in the contempt, in the superiority, in the gratuitous cruelty. Georgina turned her back to the square, closed the balcony door, and slowly entered the house, carrying on her shoulders the weight of all the years of being belittled. She sat on the bed. She looked at her hands, wrinkled, tired, but full of history. And for the first time, she thought that perhaps the neighbors were right. Perhaps she had done everything wrong in life. Perhaps sewing was, indeed, something for poor people. Perhaps no one would ever see in her the talent that her daughter had always seen. Slowly, as if she were dismantling a piece of her own soul, she put the sewing machine inside the cupboard. That sound, tur-tur-tur, that had accompanied her all her life, fell silent for the first time. Across the street, the neighbors still laughed, still mocked, still spread venom. But one thing was about to change. Long before being humiliated, Georgina had already been a promise made by her daughter, a promise that was about to be fulfilled before the whole world. In the days that followed, Dona Georgina's house seemed even smaller, and quieter than ever. The sewing machine, stored inside the cupboard, was missed as if it were someone. The sound that had always lulled her mornings and afternoons had disappeared, and without it, the whole house seemed empty, like a room where the clock had stopped. Georgina woke up early out of habit, but she didn't have the courage to open the balcony door. She sat on the edge of the bed, hands on her lap, listening to the heavy silence of the neighborhood outside. From time to time, the noise from the square reached her. Laughter, conversations, the distant sound of life happening without her presence. She avoided going out. She avoided the corner store, the newsstand, even the bakery. The only path she took was to the gate, and only to pick up the milk left by the delivery man. Each step seemed to weigh more than the last. She thought about the navy blue dress. She thought about the neighbors' laughter. I thought about the children imitating the sound of the washing machine. I thought about the phrase that pierced her soul. Her daughter must die of shame. That wouldn't leave her head. It was like a persistent echo, repeated 1,000 times throughout the day. And with each repetition, the pain increased a little more. Georgina began to feel ashamed even of her own appearance. She looked in the mirror and saw wrinkles she had never noticed before. She saw her gray hair, her tired eyes. She saw the simplicity of the clothes she sewed herself and, for the first time, wished she wasn't who she was. One afternoon, sitting alone in the living room, she opened the wooden box. The box of letters from her daughter. Her hands trembled as she touched the oldest envelope, the one written in the tiny handwriting of the still teenage girl. Mom, one day I'm going to make beautiful clothes, and I'm going to tell everyone that I learned from you. Another letter. Everything I know started there, on that balcony, watching you cut and sew without ever complaining. Another. I promise I'll make you proud, Mom. I promise the world will see what I see. Georgina pressed the letters against her chest and cried for the first time since the humiliation. But it wasn't just sadness. It was shame, fear, and a feeling of failure so profound it hurt to the bone. Her daughter hadn't called in weeks. Messages were few and short. Not out of lack of love, but because of a busy schedule, trips, commitments. Even so, the distance seemed greater now, as if her daughter were in a world where Georgina no longer fit. For a moment, she thought that perhaps the neighbors were right. Perhaps a famous daughter would be ashamed of having a seamstress mother. Perhaps she, Georgina, was too small to be a source of pride. She closed the box quickly, like someone closing a wound to stop it from bleeding. But that night, her cell phone vibrated. A message from her daughter. Georgina's heart raced even before she read it. Mom, I need to tell you something important. It's going to be on TV on a special date. Please promise me you'll watch it. It's about you. Georgina reread the message several times. Her eyes filled with tears, not of sadness, but of a timid, delicate, almost forgotten hope. A hope she hadn't felt since the day she saw her daughter board the bus with her small suitcase and enormous dreams. Something inside her pulsed again. A thread of life, thin and gleaming, reconnected in her heart. Georgina stood up slowly. She dried her face. She took a deep breath. The camera was still stored in the cupboard, but for the first time in days, she looked at the piece of furniture and felt the urge to open the door. He closed his eyes and thought, maybe I haven't lost everything yet. Maybe there's still a reason to go on. And he decided, when the day of the announcement arrived, she would be there, sitting firm, watching TV, because something deep down told her that her daughter's words weren't just affection. They were. The day of the parade arrived as days that change destinies do, without warning, without ceremony, and laden with something the heart recognizes before the mind. Donna Georgina woke up before sunrise. It wasn't out of anxiety, it was out of habit. But that morning, there was something different in the air, a lighter silence, almost full of expectation. She made a simple coffee, but couldn't take more than 2 sips. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted her hair, trying to tidy up the white strands. She chose the most discreet dress she had, one she had sewn herself years ago, made of soft floral fabric, already faded by time. She sat down in front of the television well before the appointed time. The program was still showing commercials, but her heart was already racing, as if she already knew what was coming. When the broadcast began, the presenter's voice announced, and now, the most anticipated fashion show of the year. Live from one of the biggest fashion events in the country, Georgina took a deep breath. The models began to enter, one after another, showcasing beautiful pieces all created by her daughter, whom she hadn't seen in months. Light fabrics, vibrant colors, modern cuts. Everything so different from that simple balcony with its old sewing machine. But at the same time, everything so familiar. Because of one detail, the dresses had seams identical to those Georgina had made her whole life. It was impossible not to recognize them. The TV showed flashes, excited journalists, a packed audience. Her daughter, now an elegant, confident, powerful woman, appeared in the background, coordinating everything with a sparkle in her eyes. Georgina put her hand to her chest. She felt pride and a pang. The distance between them seemed immense at that moment. But then, something changed in the broadcast. The show came to an end. The audience applauded, standing, and the daughter walked to the main stage, holding a microphone. The broadcast focused on her face and the whole world stopped to listen. Her voice came out firm, but trembling with emotion. Today, I need to reveal something I haven't told before. Something that, for me, is worth more than all the awards I've ever received. People in the audience leaned forward. The tension was almost palpable. The daughter continued, "Everything I know, everything I do, every stitch, every cut, every line, I learned from an extraordinary woman." Georgina felt her heart stop for a second. The daughter raised her arm and pointed to a large screen behind her. The image changed. An old photo, a simple balcony, a woman sewing. It was Georgina, young, with braids, focused on sewing a skirt hem. The audience murmured in surprise. The daughter smiled with tears in her eyes. "That woman is my mother, the best seamstress who ever lived in my life." Georgina put her hand to her mouth. Her eyes instantly filled with tears. The daughter continued, "I know she lives far away. I know she might not be here today. But if she's watching, Mom." The daughter took a deep breath, her voice choked with emotion. "The world already knows my name. But today, I want them to know my mother's name. Donna Georgina, the seamstress from the back street." The audience erupted in applause. Shouts, people crying, cameras flashing like nervous stars, and the models returned to the stage, one by one. But something was different. They were all wearing dresses directly inspired by the pieces Georgina had sewn her whole life. The same ruffles, the same gathers, the same details that the neighbors called tacky and gaudy. Now, they were trendy, they were art, they were fashion. The daughter held up a small box and said, "These are the first pieces from my original collection. The first references, the first hands that held a needle for me." Inside the box, the camera showed the fabric scraps that Georgina had given her daughter to play with when she was a child. Georgina burst into tears. At the same time, outside the house, some neighbors were gathered watching the same broadcast. And when they heard the name Donna Georgina, they froze. The woman they called the Queen of Rags was the mother of a famous fashion designer. She was a fashion inspiration. She was before the eyes of the entire country the root of a talent that the world applauded. The most arrogant of them dropped her glass. The most critical put her hand to her forehead, startled. And some of the children who had mocked the noise of the machine fell silent, not knowing where to hide their shame. Meanwhile, in the blue room, in front of the hissing TV, Georgina sobbed softly, her hands on her face. She couldn't believe it. It wasn't just her daughter being affectionate. It wasn't just recognition. It was the whole world looking at her, the simple woman, the ignored seamstress, as if she were the center of the parade. The daughter finished with a firm voice, "Mom, this fashion show is yours. Everything I am comes from you. Thank you for stitching my story together." Absolute silence in the street, in the living room, in Georgina's heart. And then, something was reborn within her. Something old, something beautiful. Something that had been trampled on for years, but never destroyed. Pride in herself. The humiliated seamstress became an inspiration for an entire generation. A promise. The morning after the fashion show, the street that used to ignore Donna Georgina seemed different. The sun hadn't even risen properly and there were already people circling her sidewalk, but this time, not to mock, laugh, or whisper insults. It was silence. A shy, embarrassed silence, full of people who didn't know how to face their own conscience. Georgina was still sitting at the table, trying to understand what had happened the night before. The television was off. Her eyes were still swollen. Her heart was still racing. She didn't feel famous, or special, or above anyone. She felt seen, and that, for her, was rarer than any compliment. When she opened the door, she found the most talkative neighbor on the street standing in front of the gate, holding a makeshift cake. "Mrs. Georgina, I wanted to talk." The woman, the one who humiliated her the most, had a trembling voice. She looked at the ground before looking at her. I never imagined you were so talented. We were wrong, very wrong." Georgina took a deep breath. She felt a slight pang in her chest, but not of resentment, of surprise. "I just sew, my dear," she replied, simple as always. The neighbor shook her head. "No, you don't just sew. You create. You inspire. You are You are the mother of that designer. We didn't know. Georgina smiled slightly, a small but genuine smile. You didn't need to know, she replied. I've sewn my whole life because I needed to, and because I loved it. The neighbor swallowed hard, moved, and as if that moment opened an invisible door, the other neighbors began to approach. One brought flowers, another, an apology card. Some children held hastily made drawings, portraying Georgina as the famous seamstress of the street. Even the group that had previously laughed at the sewing machine appeared, crestfallen. Sorry, Aunt Georgina. We shouldn't have made fun of you. She, with a calmness that only someone who has suffered greatly can possess, replied, You're young. Learn this. Never laugh at anyone's work. Work is what sustains people. The children agreed, ashamed. In the midst of all this, her cell phone beeped. A message from her daughter. Mom, I want you here with me today. The second fashion show is yours too. Georgina felt a warmth in her chest, a kind of happiness that didn't come from praise, fame, or recognition, but from the certainty that her daughter saw her, always saw her, and always honored her. A few hours later, her daughter sent a car to pick her up. The entire neighborhood watched in silence and astonishment as the seamstress entered an elegant car not as an employee, but as an honored guest. And for the first time, no one laughed. At the event, Georgina was greeted with applause, discreet at first, then growing. People greeted her as if she were part of the history of Brazilian fashion. And she was. The second show was even more moving. At the end, her daughter called her mother to the stage. Georgina didn't know where to put her hands, nor how to handle so much brilliance and praise. But when her daughter held her hand and whispered, Mom, now the world knows. But I always knew. Georgina felt that, finally, what she had sown her whole life, love, sacrifice, strength, was returning to her, sown in the form of affection. Back in the neighborhood, life changed. Neighbors who used to ask for credit now insisted on paying in advance. Children asked to learn to sew. Women asked for designs made by her with pride, no longer with disdain. And Georgina, for the first time, was working with a light heart. Not because I needed to, but because, finally, she was valued. And on a sunny afternoon, sitting on the porch with the machine that had previously been a source of jokes, Georgina smiled to herself and thought, the world took its time, but it saw. Some stories seemed too small to attract attention. Stories of simple women, with callous hands, of entire lives dedicated to silent work. Stories that pass by on the street every day, but that no one sees. Until one day, the world stops, looks, and understands. Donna Georgina's life is proof of that. The neighborhood mocked, despised, belittled, called what was, deep down, talent, dedication, and art rags. But time, it always finds a way to put each story in its rightful place. Because humble talent doesn't shout. It works. It persists. It resists the laughter of others, and waits for the moment to be recognized. And when that moment arrives, no one can ignore it. That woman who sewed alone on her balcony, under scornful glances, became an inspiration to the whole world. And not because she sought fame, but because she lived with truth, love, and dignity. Because she never needed to humiliate anyone to show her worth. And because her daughter, the only one who always saw her greatness, carried her mother's legacy to the most luminous stage of her career. It's like that with many women. Mothers, grandmothers, aunts, neighbors. Women who do so much with so little. Women who create talent where there is only difficulty. Women who sustain dreams that are not their own but that grow because of them. The question that remains is simple. How many Georginas does the world still ignore? How many humble talents have you seen belittled? And more importantly, how many times have you been laughed at before your value was recognized? Stories like this are a powerful reminder. Do not underestimate the work of someone simple. Do not laugh at the effort of those who struggle. Do not belittle those who are just starting out. Because the world criticizes today, but applauds tomorrow. And for you who have heard this story this far, who perhaps recognize yourself in it, who perhaps carry your own hidden pains, feel embraced. Your story is still being woven, and the most beautiful part is yet to come. And if this story touched you, like, comment, and follow our channel. Here, You are part of a community of real women, strong women who overcome humiliation, injustice, and invisibility every day. Stories like this are told to remind you that you are not alone, and that your worth never depends on the perspective of those who diminish you.